I actually think this conversation is shifting over the last couple years, and we've seen that trust is declining, particularly in traditional markers of authority like government, like journalists, like CEOs, right? There's two areas where it's remained flat or has gone up, and that's I trust people like myself and I trust my CEO. I trust my community. And so when you combine all of those factors, brands have to be leveraging individuals. They can't just hide behind their logo. And so if the only way we can build that trust and have those relationships is through the individual, if you're not, if you're saying no, individuals who we've hired, who we say are espousing our mission, are building the brand, are building the products, have the same values of us, is if those people, if you can't trust them to go be the representatives and be the person that your audience can trust, you're missing out.
Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, exploring all the ways that companies can build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering its employees to become powerful ambassadors of the company brand. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I'm very happy to bring you this episode where we'll be talking about how employees can build their personal brands as thought leaders. But first, do you wonder if your internal emails are being read and engaged with? Then take a look at Workshop. Workshop is the #1 email platform for internal communications that integrates with all of your favorite comms channels and data sources. With a tool like Workshop, you can easily track the results of your emails with real-time analytics. You can cross-post your messages to the channels that your team uses the most, like Slack and SharePoint, and you can discover what content performs the best so that you can improve your internal communication strategy over time. Go beyond open rates to measure the effectiveness of your internal emails. Learn more at useworkshop.com. Now, let's jump into this conversation with my featured guest, Ashley Faus. Ashley is a marketer, writer, and speaker, and she'll be sharing about how employees can build their personal brands as thought leaders. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm very excited about this conversation. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I always like to talk about employee branding and thought leadership and all the things. So this is going to be a fun one.
I know you do, and it's your area. And when I thought about this topic, I figured you would be the best person. I know on season 3, we had our mutual colleague, Bill Sherman, on, and he dug into the area of thought leadership and how company brands can really think about leveraging rather their employees as thought leaders and how that impacts things like employee brand advocacy and the overall growth of the company brand. But when it came down to having a practical conversation now about how employees can actually build their own personal brands as thought leaders, I'm like, yeah, Ashley is the person. So I'm very, very excited about this conversation. And Ashley, we're just going to jump right into it. And I always like to start off my episodes with what I call a level set question. We have listeners and viewers from about 17 countries across the world at last check. So I never like to assume that everybody knows everything about the nomenclatures that we're going to be using. So thought leadership, what is a thought leader, Ashley? Let's start there.
It's going to sound basic, but I like
Mhm.
to go back to the definition of each word. If you go back to the definition of thought and leader, it's have thoughts, be a leader. And it's like, you haven't actually said anything. And I'm like, no, but think about it, right? When you think about having thoughts, and obviously I've got a 4-pillar framework, which I'm sure we'll dive into, but when you talk about having thoughts, you have to have something to say. You have to be sharing tips. You have to be doing new and novel things. You have to be codifying that knowledge in a way that someone else can take it and use it and take action on it. So that's the have thoughts piece. Be a leader implies that you have followers. It implies that you have an audience, and it implies that people are listening to you, taking action on those thoughts that you've shared, and somehow engaging with you. And I think that you have to have both of those. There's a lot of people who are doing really great work for their careers, their teams, and their companies. They're having the thoughts. but they're not sharing them to actually build that following to be a leader. There's also a lot of people who are being leaders. We see this with a lot of influencers. We see this with a lot of business leaders where they do have maybe a big audience, or maybe they have a big title because they're in the C suite and they're doing really well for the business. They have a large audience, but they're not actually sharing anything of substance. They're just popular because they have a big title or popular because they're famous. So to be a thought leader, you really have to combine both of those. Have thoughts, be a leader.
I love how you combine those two words, Ashley, because you're right. There are some people who are leaders, not really out there with thoughts or sharing thoughts, or some people have thoughts are not sharing it. It's a segue, I think, to my next question, which is, do I therefore need to have a strong personal brand in order to start to think or position myself as a thought leader? Does one have to come before the other?
I think these are built in tandem, and I'll dive into why I think that. So my framework for thought leaders measures you on four different pillars that work together in tandem. So credibility, that's, do you know what you're talking about? Do you have that expertise? Do people believe you when you're sharing your thoughts? The second is profile. And this is where a lot of that personal branding comes in. It's, how well known are you? How big is your audience? What's the nature of that audience? Is it your peers? Is it other respected people, outlets, influencers, leaders in the industry? And that's again where that personal brand comes in a little bit in terms of, are you recognizable? Do people remember you and want to kind of follow you? The third pillar is around your being prolific. And so this is, how often are you sharing? Where are you sharing? Are you speaking? Are you on podcasts? Are you writing? Are you speaking on stage? Have you written a book, right? Are you prolific and sharing those ideas? And then the last pillar is around depth of ideas. And I think this also feeds into the personal brand as well. What are you known for? So for you, the internal marketing podcast, you're known for that internal marketing. You obviously do a lot of different things in your day job as a CMO, but the thing that you're known for in your personal brand is really that intersection of marketing, internal marketing, employee branding, and those types of conversations. So it'd be weird for you to suddenly come out and have a conversation about email subject lines. Like, why would Carrie Ann be talking about email subject lines, right? That doesn't make any sense. It's funny too, because this comes up quite often in my conversations where people are like, so how does what you talk about from a thought leadership standpoint and a personal branding standpoint and social media and content strategy, how exactly are you doing that in your day job? And I'm like, well, in my current role, most of this stuff is not one-to-one applicable. I do product marketing for Agile and DevOps. So I'm marketing to developers. And yes, there is an element where tech evangelists and technology leaders and dev leaders need to be thought leaders. And there's pieces of this that come into that. But I do a whole bunch of stuff in my day job that have nothing to do with this. And so when you look at the depth of ideas and the personal brand that I've started to build about what I talk about, it's a little bit distinct from what I do in my day job. So those are the four pillars. And I don't think that, a lot of people think that developing a personal brand is about having a tagline or wearing a certain color shirt or wearing a scarf versus wearing a hat, right? Like they think of it in terms of a color palette, or they think of it in terms of a sassy tone. Like, I'm the sassy marketer, or yes, I'm the academic marketer, right? Those are elements of your personal brand, but that doesn't come before the depth of ideas and building that credibility. Those things have to go in tandem.
I love that. And I know what you're referring to when you talk about color or what you wear or how you speak is more probably along the lines of maybe your brand identity elements. But you're right. If you want to leverage or have your personal brand be associated with an area or aspect of thought leadership or particular thought or topic, then you are going to have to bring the two together. Ashley, as we're talking, and I know this comes up in different conversations on LinkedIn when we talk about something like this, employees who are building their personal brands on thought leadership, around thought leadership, different topics that are thought that they want to be the leaders in that thought in their industry. But what tends to happen again in conversations on LinkedIn is that companies are not always comfortable with the idea of having employees who are thought leaders, or certainly worse. Well, first of all, they're not comfortable in a lot of instances with employees building their personal brands on social. That's one. But two, even now beginning to be a thought leader where they're now recognized as a leader in a particular area of thought that may or may not be associated with their day job, but they're elevating themselves, or they have become elevated as a thought leader in the industry or in their particular space. Companies are struggling with that. I mean, in your view, how does a company benefit? Should a company really seek to engage or seek to embrace, rather, the fact that it's okay to have employees who are building personal brands as thought leaders or not? I mean, what's your word to companies who are still kind of struggling with that?
I actually think this conversation is shifting over the last couple years. I think that the rise of all of these platforms that have lowered the barrier to entry for people to become individual creators and to really scale up their content creation, how they share knowledge, and what they can do to showcase their own creativity. I think that's one element where that has significantly lowered the barrier to entry. And so the conversation is shifting because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I love to cite the Edelman Trust Barometer. So this is a longitudinal study over the last, call it decade, and we've seen that trust is declining, particularly in traditional markers of authority like government, like journalists, like CEOs, right? There's two areas where it's remained flat or has gone up, and that's I trust people like myself and I trust my CEO. I trust my community, people that I can have that personal relationship with. And so as we start to see now with AI coming on, there is a flood of content that is coming out that has questionable source citations, no source citations, questionable accuracy. And so that ability to say, okay, who is this person that I know who is like me, who I have a personal connection with? That has to happen through individuals. And I think it's going to happen even more in those in person conversations. And so when you start to see that who I am online, what I share online, and who I am and what I share in person, all of that matches. That builds that trust. And so when you combine all of those factors, brands have to be leveraging individuals. They can't just hide behind their logo. They can't just hide behind, we've been around for 100 years. They can't hide behind their revenue. They can't hide behind this one nice story that happened over there from a customer service or a brand experience or a product showcase standpoint, because there's too many ways to fake it now. And so if the only way we can build that trust and have those relationships is through the individual, if you're not, if you're saying no, individuals who we've hired, who we say are espousing our mission, are building the brand, are building the products, have the same values of us, is if those people, if you can't trust them to go be the representatives and be the person that your audience can trust, you're missing out. And I think the funniest thing when I hear conversations like this, I'm s- and in terms of the conversation shifting, I'm hearing a lot of companies say, we need to hire somebody with a big audience, and they'll name some well-known people in the industry and they're like, can we hire them? And I'm like, guys, you can't on one side say, let's hire this person who has already built this. And on the other side say, we're not going to allow or encourage or enable our employees to build this for themselves. Why would you do that? Those are incompatible statements. And then the next question is, wow, but we're trying to say poach this person from this other brand. If we have our employees build this themselves, won't someone try to poach them? And again, at the point where the employee is ready to leave and quote unquote be poached, that didn't come because they built their personal brand. Something else is going on. There are two sides to that equation. So you're so worried that somebody's going to get poached if you allow them to do this thing, but you're missing the side of the equation that's actually your responsibility in terms of growth opportunities, you know, strong mission, strong product market fit, et cetera, compensation. Again, that's not the core area of my expertise, but that is a counter argument to we don't want people building these brands. So I think there's multiple overarching trends that are driving this from a trust standpoint. The conversation is shifting where employees and employers and brands are saying, we want to hire people like that. And then just the realization that you can't have it both ways, that you want to go find all these people who already built it, but not invest in building it internally for yourself.
Exactly. And, it's leading into the next point in that if, as a company, you want to now be open to allowing and, quote unquote, whether if you want to be comfortable with your employees building their personal brands as thought leaders in this case, there are obviously, I think, risks involved. And I think that that's what's causing a lot of companies to be nervous about it. I mean, you mentioned the risk of poaching as one of them. But in your view, how can companies kind of mitigate those risks? Because there are obvious benefits, right? So these are employees who live with us. They know what's going on underneath the rug. And people in their own individual communities as employees trust them more than they trust the company brand. So there is an obvious plus if companies are going to be comfortable with employees building brands and positioning themselves as thought leaders. But how do they mitigate those risks, Ashley?
I think there's three things. The first thing is it starts at the hiring level. So, and this is true not just for empowering those people to build their brands, but it's also just generally when we talk about, so I work in Agile and DevOps. And so security is a big piece of the conversation, the insider threat, right? How do we mitigate insider threats? I'm like, step one, hire people who are aligned with your values and who are aligned with serving your audience, right? Even if I leave Atlassian, I'm not going to do damage to that brand because I'm aligned with it. Just because maybe we part ways from a career standpoint or a growth standpoint today, I wouldn't have come to work here and I wouldn't have stayed for as long as I had if I wasn't aligned from a values perspective, from a impact perspective to our customers and to our audience. So that's step one is you need to hire right. And this is true also, there's an adjacent piece of this when people say, oh, we want to go out and hire somebody who has already built this. Do they align with the types of messages that you're trying to share? Are they aligned with your audience needs and pain points and victories? And this is not just about knowledge of those people. This is about true alignment from a values, impact, mission standpoint. So that's step one. Step two is educating them about what the company is trying to do through these channels. And this is not giving them assets and giving them copy that they're supposed to then stamp out across all of their channels. So this is a perfect example from Atlassian. We are very big about climate change, renewable energy, and really thinking about our impact on the environment. And so from a values and hiring standpoint, we would probably not want to hire someone who is, a lobbyist for an oil company, let's say. Let's say this person has turned over a brand new leaf and they've decided that actually they are now a climate advocate. If we decided to change our messaging to say, okay, we're actually no longer going to be focused on climate change and renewable energy. Instead, we're going to be very focused on DE and I topics, right? And again, those two things can live together. But let's say we're leaning more into climate or we're leaning more into DE and I topics. Let your employees know that, right? AI is a huge conversation. We're obviously starting to tell that story. We've got some things in our products that we're talking about that, but a big conversation that we're having around AI is the ethics and data privacy and source citations. And so when we talk about AI, it's not just what are the capabilities that we're building into our products. It's how are we thinking about building those things? Tell your employees that. It's not giving me copy to say, at Atlassian, we believe that we need to do responsible AI, right? That you and whether we publish the video or not, what I just did was like sit up very straight and puff out my chest and have this very formal tone. It comes across as inauthentic, right? So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about DE and I, when we talk about how we're building AI, tell your employees that, empower them with kind of the ethos of the story, not necessarily the specific words. And then the third piece is educating them about how to build their personal brand. So conversations like this, and we'll talk tactically about narratives and content depths and how do you shape your own story? How do you discover your own voice? How do you figure out what you wear? How do you figure out the lines that you draw around how much personal content to share and how you frame up that content? Empowering people is not just about empowering them to talk about your story, it's empowering them to discover and talk about their story. And that I think is a huge gap. A lot of people are actually really solid on the hiring. They're actually really solid on sharing. And maybe I'm just biased because Atlassian is quite good at those first two. But I think even we have a gap on how we empower at scale. I think we do it well for a smaller cohort of folks, but we're figuring out how do we do this at scale because we've got the right people, we've got the right stories. Now we have to help those people tell those stories. So those are the three key things that I think a lot of companies miss in terms of mitigating the risks of sharing.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned just empowering people because I think that's also, to my mind, the ultimate demonstration of the commitment that the company has when they say, look, we're serious about being totally comfortable with our employees building their brands, totally comfortable with employees positioning themselves as thought leaders. Uh, but I'd love to probably just dig a little deeper, Ashley, when we talk about companies empowering their employees. Based on your experience, based on what's been working and what's not working, what are some of the ways you think companies can deliver that kind of empowerment at scale?
What doesn't work is forcing everybody to use the exact same language of saying, here's 10 different tweets, copy and paste. Here's the same three images. Please share, right? That's what doesn't work. And that's what a number of companies are trying to do. So think what does work, there's a couple of things. First, you have to meet the employees where they are. So one thing that I think Atlassian has done very well is we've created a number of different spaces for the employees to experience the stories, the announcements, the wins that we've had. We've got Slack channels for announcements. We've got town halls across the org. We've got a global town hall that really elevates the stories we're trying to tell. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to where you're getting these announcements. Our leaders have started to do videos. So, for example, our president and COO, Anu, she does a weekly refresh and it's a quick video and she talks about what's top of mind. She talks about the conversation she's had with customers. She talks about some of the things that are happening in the organization. And so that that ability to consume the stories that are happening and to identify with the stories that resonate with you internally, I have all sorts of different ways that I can do that. It's not just, okay, you have to go into social sharing tool with the purpose of hitting share on these things. It's like, no, I'm getting information from my leaders about the different things that we're doing. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is actually involving the employees. So we have a number of stories. We recently launched a campaign called Impossible Alone. And what a lot of brand campaigns do is they go off by themselves with an agency, they hire actors and they give the actors a script and they create these flashy videos and then they come back internally and they say, employees, amplify our brand campaign. And I'm like, listen, that's fine for you, brand team. Why? Why am I going to ship this? In contrast, what we did, we came together and said, employees, let's talk about your stories. And so, for example, one of the things that we discussed is this Team Anywhere video. And so we talk about ways of working remotely and how it's impossible alone if you just sit in your little silo. And so we actually went out and asked employees all over the world to film themselves talking about how they work, how their teams operate, what that flexibility to work remotely has done for them. And so when we combine that, it's now instead of me saying, let me share Atlassian's remote work policy, and instead let me say, let me share how Ashley has time to do musicals because I can work in a place where I can commute to make it to rehearsal on time. That is a much more powerful story that I'm willing to share that's authentic to the brand and authentic to me. And so really involving your employees in that storytelling. Another thing we've done from a super tactical standpoint, for example, anytime we do a product launch in the Agile and DevOps space, we ask our product managers to share what they built, why they built it, the customer feedback that they used to build those products. Sure, we could just give them a blog post that says, hello, we have announced this thing. Or we could say, product manager, what was it like to gather that feedback? What was it like to shepherd this feature through the process. And when they come in and they say, I'd been watching this customer feedback come in and it made me angry that they didn't like this thing. So we decided to change it. And now the feedback we got from our beta users is that they're happy, they're excited, they love it. I'm proud to ship because I'm getting positive feedback. That is a much better story than just, hello, we have shipped a new feature. Thank you. I am proud. We are excited today to ship a feature. So I think that's the biggest thing is helping the employees tell their story by actually asking them what their stories are. How did it make you feel? What actions did you take? What drove those actions? That's how you get those stories out there and people are excited to share.
I love your mention of how companies can share stories, but at the same time, not necessarily dictating how those stories are then now to be shared by the employees. It's really something special as you talk about the word authenticity, and that word comes up in these episodes so very often. It's how are you empowering employees to authentically share stories, yes, coming from the company or maybe their own experiences with the company, empowering them to really authentically share, especially on social media channels where that's what people are there to do. They're there to interact with you as best as possible, being your authentic self. They're not just there to be pitch slapped with commercials or blogs or whatever, but it's really something special when a company can say, hey, these are the stories that are happening right now, and just giving them the opportunity to share that. I mean, so Ashley, so we've spoken to companies and how companies can empower their employees to build their brands as thought leaders. Now let's speak to the employees themselves now, because we have those who are listening who are like, hey, I'm an employee in a company, and yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable. The company's okay with me kind of building my brand, putting myself out there as a thought leader. But what do I do? How do I do that? And I'd love for you to share that with us.
First, you have to figure out what the heck you're going to talk about. And I would say you need to speak from experience. So I think this is one mistake that a lot of people make. They think they have to be perfect right out of the gates. They think that they have to come in as the expert. And so because they have to come in as the expert, they have to just establish right out of the gates. I know everything about this topic. I've experienced everything that could go wrong. And I've had all of these huge wins. And the reality is that in most cases, the people that you identify with most actually bring you along on that learning journey. It's not the people who sit on the mountaintop and declare how things should be. It's the people, if you think about Sherpas, that help you carry your own pack. They've traveled the path before. Sometimes the path changes, there's snow or there's a rock slide, right? And they know how to navigate that path. And so they bring you along in that way. And so as you start to think about what you're going to talk about, I like to think about this in terms of content depths. So conceptual, strategic, and tactical. And the conceptual is the what and the why of the idea. And this might be something that you're super passionate about. This might be current problems that you're trying to solve. This is where that expertise comes in. At the strategic level, this is the processes, the key knowledge components, the tools that you need to make that idea reality, and it's helping people think about the solution space. So this is a perfect example. We previously were talking about conceptually, why do you need to build a brand? Why should employers help employees do that and empower them to do that? As an employee, why do you want to start to build this? Now we're talking at the strategic level of like, here's this framework of how you can figure out what to talk about. Here's how you can learn more about the different types of platforms or the different types of assets that you could share. And then at the tactical level, this is your nitty gritty step-by-step instructions. And so again, if we were to go into, for example, how do you discover your tone and your voice? At the tactical level, one of the exercises I recommend to people is to try to write their bio in a bunch of different ways. Write it short, write it long, write it sarcastic, write it formal, write it humble, write it arrogant. Which of those starts to feel like the authentic you, right? It's a weird thing to be like, how do I speak? Like how do I figure out
Mm,
how I speak? And the
yeah.
bio is actually a really interesting way to figure that out. So that would be a tactical depth recommendation about how you talk about this. And so when you start to think about what are the problems that you're solving that you're very passionate about, how are you solving those problems in a way that's helping you, helping your team, helping your audience? That might be a really great intersection for you to say, here's how I discovered this problem, or here's why I'm passionate about it, here's why this problem matters. here's how I think about it, or frameworks I use, or tools that I use to discover the edges of the problem or to implement the solution. And then tactically, here's 5 things I did yesterday to move this work forward. And so that's how you can start to think about it. That's the first step, is to figure out, what are you going to talk about? One thing that I recommend is to find the sweet spot. So a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to talk about marketing. That is a big topic. What specifically about marketing are you going to talk about? Right. And if you ask people, the other interesting thing is people sometimes feel like they're stuck in a box of what their day job is, or the experience that they've had at work over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. That's not the point. The point is to say, what do you want to be known for in the future? What do you want people to ask you about in the future? So talk about that. Think about it in terms of, I would say, a 18-month or so horizon. What's something that you want to be talking about and you want people to come to you for over the next 18 months? And that could be a learning journey where you're trying to expand into a new skill set. And so you're going to take people on that learning journey. So that's kind of what I would say start with. And then obviously going into some of the personal branding aspects around your tone of voice, the types of language that you use, which platforms you use. But again, a lot of people bite off more than they can chew because they think they have to be in every platform and they have to come out and they have to be perfect and they have to be an expert. We're all on this journey together, and it's changing constantly. And so the key is to bring people along on the journey, not pretend that you've mastered the journey so much that now everybody's just going to sit at your feet and listen to you pontificate about how you're so smart.
I want to dig in just a little bit more when you spoke about what do you want to talk about? What's your kind of a topic that you want to talk about? And I know that on my thought leadership brand building journey, there was a conversation about the intersection between what it is you want to talk about versus what does your audience need to hear or want to hear, right? Because sometimes there's no intersection, if I was to be very honest. So like even just my own internal marketing journey, I discovered, well, internal marketing as a nomenclature had existed for many, many years before this podcast was launched. Obviously, it's not something I came up with. But in my journey to find a topic, internal marketing was what came up as, in my view, a meaningful solution to some of the challenges that marketers were facing, I thought. But what I find often is that it's hard to the extent that not everybody really cares. They're like, okay, and you're kind of, talking or pontificating. I mean, I would love to find another word, but yeah, you're just talking about internal marketing, but maybe I feel like not enough people care. But I mean, what's your advice, I guess, to people who they want to talk about something, they feel passionate about it, they certainly have the expertise in it, but is it that they're talking to the wrong audience? Is it that they should really just find something else to talk about that people care about? I mean, what's your advice to those people? Because it's a hard journey to be a thought leader, especially if your thought is not something that people have substantially logged on to yet, as it were.
I think there's a couple of approaches for that. First, you're correct, is finding the right audience. So as an example, my audience I have found really resonates on LinkedIn, in part because I naturally kind of think in that mid-form content way. I struggle to think short the way that Twitter wants. I struggle to think so visually the way that Instagram wants, but I found that I naturally think and my audience likes to consume on LinkedIn. So that's the first thing. You may be targeting the wrong audience, and or you may be targeting the wrong platform. So that's the first thing. Second thing, as a thought leader, by definition, you're introducing something new. And the problem that I find is a lot of people jump too far ahead of their audience. And so, for example, when you talk about internal marketing, if you just say internal marketing, people might not know what that is. And so they say they don't care. But if you actually articulate the problems that they're facing, people are like, yes, I have that problem. Why are my employees not engaged? How do I get my employees to share? Right now, all of a sudden, you've latched on to the thing that they're talking about. And I think sometimes we get so enamored with the new thing that we've come up with that we forget that our audience doesn't know what that is. They can't get excited if they don't know what it is. So I remember when I introduced the content playground, and if I just say, yeah, the playground mindset or the content playground. And people are like, I don't, I don't know what that is. When I then explain, here's the problems with the traditional funnel or the linear funnel or the looping decision journey, people are nodding their heads and they're like, yes. And they're laughing and and I frame it up to say, we know all of this exists. So why are we still doing it? And then when I say, instead, we need to shift to this mindset, people are like, yes, it is a playground. But if I just come out there and harp and harp and harp on the content playground, nobody knows what that is and nobody cares. So, from my perspective, especially if you're introducing new nomenclature, new jargon, a new topic, you have to meet the audience where they are. And you can probably find them if you mirror their language and you start to bring them along on that journey to evolve. How did I, how did you come up with internal marketing as the thing you wanted to talk about? Well, you went on this journey of discovering all of these problems and you're looking around saying, is anybody solving this effectively? If so, how do I find them? What are they labeling themselves as? And at that point, then you discover, okay, internal marketing is the thing, but it's kind of nascent. It was the same thing for me with the playground. I was wrestling with this problem and I found that I kept having to explain myself and I kind of stumbled on this metaphor. And I finally was like, this seems like it could work as my thing, but I still have to educate people about how I got there, why the current thinking is not working. And once you do that, people are like, totally agree. But you can't just come at them with this net new thing and just be like, I don't know why you're not willing to talk to me about this. So my mindset is that the one nice thing about, the internet and all of these niche echo chambers, you can find somebody else who cares about what you're talking about. Like there are some niche topics. I also don't think that any topic is boring just because it's not interesting to me. Somebody is willing to go all the way down the rabbit hole with you about this topic. So you just need to find where they are and how they're talking about it. And if you're saying, I'm going to now evolve how we think about this or how we speak about this, you have to be the person that can bridge that to say, here's the old way of thinking or speaking. Here's the new way of thinking and speaking. And here's how you get there. Here's how you bridge from old to new. And that's where you can really start to find those people. So if you're shouting and no one's listening, you might be shouting in a forest and you actually need to go shout on a beach. You might be shouting in a different language and you actually need to kind of translate, or you may be shouting to the wrong people, right? You're either shouting in the wrong place, you're shouting in the wrong language, or you're shouting to the wrong people. If I go to the gym and I start blathering on about making cakes, I'm probably talking to the wrong people about that. Nobody at the gym wants to go down the rabbit hole with me about different types of flour.
Not
And
at
same
all.
thing,
Or
there's
maybe they do and they know they shouldn't. So I'm supposed to be losing weight, but yeah, talk more.
exactly, exactly. The other piece of this is if you start to find that you've got a mismatch all the way around, those would be the three places to diagnose.
And I love that you highlighted that maybe you're talking to the wrong people because sometimes who you think is your audience is certainly for your thought or your topic is not the right audience. Sometimes your audience is in places that you just, never even imagined. And hey, they're willing to hear what you have to say. So it's just about speaking to them in as much as you speak to who you had originally intended. Ashley, this has been such a great conversation, and I reached the part of the conversation that I call my final takeaway or final nugget. But of everything you would have shared, Ashley, what, in your view, is the key takeaway that you'd love our audience to come away with today, having heard everything you would have shared?
I think the key takeaway is around authenticity. And this is both on the employer to empower employees and the employee who is looking to build that personal brand. It's authenticity. Because if you're regurgitating something, if you're saying a script, if you're waiting to come out with this big splashy presentation of what you think you should be, it's not sustainable. It's not going to build trust. And frankly, it's going to be really boring, right? There's a right path or a right set of stuff that I'm supposed to talk about, apparently. I don't want to talk about that all the time. Sometimes I want to have the intersection of cake or fitness or musical theater and my day job. Sometimes I don't want to talk about my day job at all. So that authenticity and showing up about the things you care about, showing up about the things that you have that expertise and personal experience in, not the thing you think is going to make you go viral, not the thing that you think is going to get you a promotion, not copy and pasting the assets that someone else has provided to you, but genuinely the stories, expertise, and experience that you have. That's how you're going to be able to build that brand both sustainably and attracting the right audience.
Ashley, thank you so very much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I love to end by asking you, as I ask all my awesome guests, how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you?
I would say take this idea forward. There are a lot of misconceptions about what being a thought leader is, what it means to curate a personal brand, and the intersection of those two. And it's like, I'm not selling anything. I just genuinely want to move the industry forward because it benefits me to work with smart, capable people who have that like-minded and values-aligned mindset. So I would say, connect on LinkedIn, join in the discussions, and really take this idea forward.
Absolutely. Ashley, thank you so very much for taking the time to share with us today. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I know we got some awesome nuggets. And I trust that companies and employees alike have come away with that much more information so that they can better partner together to help empower employees to build their brands as thought leaders. And I think we all get to benefit, right? The more people who are sharing ideas and having wonderful conversations, we all benefit. And I think it's a great, great way to end. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I'm sure you got some great takeaways from this conversation. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, then please join the tribe. And don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with anyone whom you believe will find it valuable as well. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.